60 years ago, in June of 1967, the Middle East would go to war. It would be the shortest and the bloodiest and the most consequential of all wars. At the heart of it were two men. Gamal Abdel Nasser, the most charismatic man to rule Egypt since the time of the pharaohs. He had come to power a decade earlier in the aftermath of the Free Officers movement that had ousted King Farouk, ending the Egyptian monarchy for good. Nasser envisioned a great pan-Arab state, unifying all Arab nations under one big tent, with him as the head. But Nasser had a problem, a stone in his shoe. It bothered him. It was uncomfortable. It would eventually have to be removed. That stone was Israel. This would set Nasser on a collision course with the other man, Levi Eshkol, the Prime Minister of Israel. Unlike Nasser, Eshkol was a simple man with no grand ambitions, no charisma, no memorable speeches, a bureaucrat devoted to managing Israel's economy and keeping the peace. In just 6 days of war, Nasser will lose everything: his army, his air force, his glory, and a large chunk of Egypt. In the ashes of victory, Eshkol would also lose political influence, lose control of his generals, and above all, lose his life's goal of achieving peace. This then is their story: the 6-day war when Israel and the Arab world faced off. Skirmishes between Israel and its Arab neighbours were all too common, but the match that would eventually set the Middle East ablaze with war began in earnest with a dispute over water. In 1964, Israel had completed a decade-long infrastructure project to divert water from the Jordan River towards arid regions like the Negev for agriculture and its growing population centres. The Arab states took offence, accusing Israel of being water grubbers. Syria was the most vocal in expressing Arab dissent. Eventually, Syria stopped talking and started doing.
The then head of the Syrian state, General Amin al-Hafiz, accusing Arab leaders of cowardice because they didn't want to attack Israel. And he said that given the command of all Arab forces in the countries surrounding Israel, he would be able to wipe out Israel in 6 hours.
With support from the Arab League, they set up a counter-infrastructure project to divert water from the Banias River in the Golan Heights and the Hasbani River in Lebanon to cut the flow before it reached Israel. The move drew the ire of Israel, and the die was cast. The tit-for-tat skirmishes peaked in April 1967 when Syrian and Israeli fighter planes clashed. Israel downed all 6 Syrian planes, humiliating Syria. The two nations had backers, so-called Big Brothers. Israel's big brother was the United States, and their domination of Syria made America look good. Syria's big brother was the Soviet Union, and so the Syrian loss had made the Soviets look weak. With the pot simmering, the Soviets give Gamal Abdel Nasser, president of Egypt, an intelligence report that Israel is massing thousands of troops, 12 brigades in all, to invade Syria in a matter of days. The report is false. Completely unaware, Nasser reacts. In a bid to honour Egypt's mutual defence pact with Syria, he rallies his country for war. Within 24 hours, 40,000 Egyptian troops supported by 300 Soviet-made tanks, 450 armoured personnel carriers and heavy artillery enter the Sinai, headed towards the border shared with Israel. The troop movements are broadcast on Egyptian national TV, and the Arab world explodes with delight and celebration. Thousands line the streets, cheering the army on as they go off to do battle. The next day, Nasser discovers that the Soviet report is false. By then, the whole Arab world is abuzz with excitement and anticipation for the annihilation of Israel, the establishment of a Palestinian state, and the spread of pan-Arabism in the region. As Nasser ponders how to undo his error, his generals ready another 60,000 Egyptian troops. Reserves are called up. Volunteers, including Palestinian militants, are already massing, and neighbouring Arab states are pledging munitions and troops to the common cause. Nasser is boxed in. Not going through with war would be seen as cowardice, a betrayal of the Arab cause, and a big disappointment for the people still dancing on the streets. Israeli intelligence informed Prime Minister Levi Eshkol that tens of thousands of Egyptian troops are heading in the direction of Israel, with hundreds of tanks, artillery, and armoured vehicles. Ever the diplomat, Eshkol clings to the belief that there must be some misunderstanding and hopes it can be resolved with dialogue. When Israeli General Yitzhak Rabin requests mobilization of reserves, Eshkol approves the call-up of only 3,000, reasoning that it would decrease the likelihood of escalation. Frustrated with Eshkol's passive response, the cabal of Israeli generals disagree, but they politely suffer the Prime Minister, for now. Israeli tank units approach to defend the border, with UN peacekeeping forces standing in the middle, but not for long. Under President Nasser's direction, UN General Inderjit Rikiye and his peacekeeping force are ordered to vacate the border within 48 hours. When Rikiye questions the Egyptian envoy on whether his government has considered the consequences of such a directive, the response he gets is staggering.
So I thought very rapidly, and I said, have you thought through what the consequences of this problem are going to be? Have you worked it out, how you're going to deal with Israel after you move your troops on the frontier and UNEF moves away? What response the Israelis are going to have? Oh, sir, I will meet you for lunch in Tel Aviv next.
In an even more staggering development, the UN Secretary-General caves into Nasser's demands without consulting the UN Security Council. The UN peacekeeping force complies with Nasser's order and gets out of the way. With nothing standing in the way of Egypt and Israel, rivers of blood are poised to flow. May 1967. 2 weeks to war. The phone rings at the Prime Minister's residence. When the peacemaker, Levi Eshkol, comes on the phone, the voice on the other end of the line informs him that Egypt has closed the Straits of Tiran. Israeli commercial ships and any ship bound for Israel will not be allowed to pass. They must go all the way around Africa and re-enter through Europe, in the Straits of Gibraltar. It's an alpha move by Nasser. He is essentially pistol-whipping Eshkol and asserting dominance over Israel. The Israeli generals have seen enough. For them, Eshkol's peacemaking is nothing more than dithering. Egypt closing the straits is effectively a declaration of war. An emergency meeting is called at the Ministry of Defense. The Israeli generals don't hold back, pressing Eshkol to authorize a preemptive strike on Egypt. Eshkol counters, insisting that Big Brother, the United States of America, has advised him not to shoot first. To keep the generals in line, he postpones the decision for 48 hours. With Egypt making all the big moves and media broadcasts showing Arabs dancing on the streets while calling for the annihilation of Israel, the Israeli public goes into full panic. King Hussein of Jordan and King Faisal of Saudi Arabia both have a very acrimonious relationship with Nasser, due in part to how Nasser came to power by toppling the Egyptian monarchy and then advocating for the spread of his Republican Socialist Revolution. But for all their differences, the two monarchs and the Pan-Arab Republican have one thing in common: their dislike of Israel. They decide to set aside their differences and join forces to oust Israel from the neighborhood.
will Saudi Arabia go to war against Israel?
نحن مستعدون لنذهب إلى
We are
أقصى.
ready to go to the furthest extremity, war.
Could I ask His Majesty what sequence of events he would like to see now in the Middle East?
أول كل شيء زوال إسرائيل.
The first thing is the extermination of Israel.
Demoralized and frightened, the Israeli public fear the looming war will bring carnage and death on an unbelievable scale. Rabbis begin consecrating large plots of land to serve as mass graves for the people. Eshkol decides to calm the public down by giving a radio speech broadcast live, a decision he would come to regret. Halfway through his speech, Eshkol stumbles on a word. Forgetting that the speech is being carried live, he turns to his assistant to ask for clarification on the word. The assistant tells him he is live. Flustered, Eshkol tries to continue with his speech and then loses track of where he was. He mumbles and bumbles his way through the rest of it. The nation is shocked. The Prime Minister seemed out of his depth.
All of a sudden, the person who's supposed to lead the Israeli military appears and stutters. And from this stammering, you can't even begin to imagine. In the entire history of the human race, a mere stumble has never been turned into such a national scandal.
Eshkol's radio speech was simply traumatic. In retrospect, one could probably say that the public overreacted. But at the time, when you didn't know what is going to happen, and the whole world is applauding Nasser, at a time when we lost our self-confidence, and the worst doubts were voiced, the impression it created was of doubt and fear.
After Eshkol's stuttering performance, confidence in his leadership plummets, and fear blankets the nation. Eventually, the anxious Israeli public turns on Eshkol, demanding decision-making be taken from the diplomat and given to a man of war. Enter Moshe Dayan, a man of war indeed. Dayan is a brilliant military strategist years ahead of his time and the most hawkish of the Israeli generals, even among infamous hardliners like Ariel Sharon. The public has spoken, and so Eshkol is sidelined. He turns the defence portfolio over to Dayan, and from this point, he will be virtually a spectator in his own government. The Israeli agenda quickly changes from seeking peace to waging total war. General Hakim Amir, Supreme Commander of the Arab Coalition Forces, is visiting Bir Tamada, an Egyptian airbase in the Sinai, to boost morale and assess final preparations for the upcoming war. What he doesn't know is that the war has already begun. The entire Israeli Air Force is now in the air, on the way to Egypt, flying by stealth and aiming to catch them cold. Led by Moshe Dayan, the Israelis have concluded that whoever strikes first will have a significant advantage. As the Egyptians sit down for breakfast, their meal is interrupted by the unmistakable sound of fighter planes above, shortly followed by the burst of explosions everywhere. The first wave of Israeli planes drop bombs on all the runways, destroying them and preventing Egyptian fighter planes from taking off. The few who do are vastly outnumbered and are quickly shot out of the sky. The next wave begin bombing Egyptian planes on the ground. With no runway to take off, Egyptian pilots bail out of their planes and run for cover on the tarmac. There is destruction and chaos in every direction. The bombing is virtually constant, with only a 3-minute reprieve between new waves of Israel bomber planes arriving. By noon, the Egyptian Air Force is eliminated. 285 planes are left smouldering on the ground. The Israelis turn their attention to the Syrian and Jordanian Air Force. They wipe out Syria's Air Force within 2 hours and make light work of Jordan in half an hour. By late afternoon on the first day of war, the entire Air Force of the Arab coalition no longer exists. Israel has total dominion over the sky in the Middle East. Shocked, Nasser orders his army in the Sinai to advance and invade Israel, but without air cover, they are dangerously exposed. Soon the Israeli Air Force begin carpet bombing them, immobilizing tanks, armored vehicles, and scattering the shell-shocked infantrymen. Reports of the war reach the big brothers. When the Soviets learn that the Arab coalition is being wiped out, they scramble 41 MiG fighter planes intending to intervene. But some in the Soviet Politburo are not so keen. They know such a move could upset Israel's big brother, the United States, and that might have unintended consequences. As the two superpowers negotiate how to respond, Israel and the Arabs duke it out in a bloodfest. Since the War of 1948, 20 years prior, Jerusalem has been divided with half in the hands of Jordan and the other half with Israel. The Wailing Wall and the Temple Mount are the holiest sites in Jerusalem from a Jewish perspective. Both are located in the Jordanian half. Moshe Dayan decides to put Jerusalem in play. For King Hussein, defending the Jordanian half of Jerusalem is a top priority, but he has already handed command of his entire army to the Egyptians, and they don't see defending Jerusalem as a military priority. For the Egyptian High Command, the priority is the Sinai, but even there, Israeli tank units are meeting little resistance as they steamroll their demoralized opponents, advancing further into Egyptian territory at an alarming rate. Nasser turns to the only lever he has left to pull: propaganda. Radio Cairo is reporting fake victories, that Egyptian fighter planes are hammering Israel and Egyptian forces have made it onto Israeli territory.
What's the radio saying about what's happened?
23 airmen for Israel.
23?
23 now.
Airplanes?
Yes, airplanes.
What, shut down?
Yes.
The Syrian public is also being fed with a steady diet of lies and propaganda.
The President of the Republic came to the TV station to make a speech to the nation. He encouraged the people, telling them that the war had started and that tomorrow we would have lunch in Tel Aviv.
In contrast, Israel maintains radio silence. The Israeli public are unaware their side is winning, and winning big. The Israeli High Command say nothing of their victories because they fear Soviet intervention and are anxious to avoid an early ceasefire imposed by the superpowers through the UN. They want to take as much territory as they can before the United Nations demands the end of hostilities. In the battle for Jerusalem, Israel unleashes tremendous firepower on the Jordanians. It is fierce and bloody. Every inch of the city gained is paid with human life. After 5 hours of close-quarter combat, 35 Israelis and 105 Jordanians lay dead. The Jordanian resistance is broken. Israel emerges victorious. Hebraic shouts of victory are heard within the walls of Jerusalem, echoing the glorious days of the Bible. Jordanians in their hundreds come out of hiding with their hands lifted in surrender. It is an astonishing sight, utterly unthinkable only a week earlier. Israel has taken control of Jerusalem. Israeli soldiers drape the flag of Israel over a tall building in the old city of Jerusalem, while other Israeli troops look on from the Wailing Wall. As Israel's conquering generals stride into the gates of Jerusalem, King Hussein considers the sobering defeat. At the UN, the Soviets are so terrified by the speed with which Israel is destroying the Arab armies. Where normally a ceasefire would require the warring parties to retreat to pre-war borders, the Soviets give in to the American-Israeli stance, agreeing to a ceasefire without withdrawal, leaving large chunks of Arab land in Jewish hands. The Israelis have no intention of hanging on to Arab lands. They immediately propose returning Arab territories under one condition, that the Arabs in turn agree to formally recognize Israel under a UN-backed peace treaty. For the non-ideological, the proposal is common-sense diplomacy. For Nasser and the Arab leaders who only a week before were calling for the extermination of Israel, Accepting such a deal is total humiliation and too big a pill to swallow. But if Nasser does not accept a ceasefire, the first of many Israeli tanks will arrive on the streets of Cairo within days. Thousands of Egyptian soldiers surrender to Israel and are held at various outposts in the Sinai. Soon, the number of Egyptians held is so overwhelming that Israel decides to keep only officers and let the ordinary infantrymen go home. To double down on the psychological warfare, many Egyptian soldiers are stripped of their uniforms. They will arrive in Egypt on bare foot, wearing only their white underclothes. Soon, Nasser can no longer hide behind propaganda as the first lot of defeated Egyptian soldiers arrive from the war front, entering the city with tales of death and defeat. The dancing fades as the people see more soldiers returning, looking dishevelled, stripped of their uniforms and utterly defeated. On the Syrian front, the Israelis have surprised even themselves. Having made short work of the Syrian defenders and seized the Golan Heights, they have advanced so far into Syria, they are now just 40 miles from the capital, Damascus. Alarm bells are ringing in Moscow. Syria's big brother, the Soviet Union, has seen enough. Premier Kosygin messages the White House with a warning: if the Israeli advance is not halted, the Soviets will intervene by taking unilateral military action against Israel. The Arab-Israeli conflict now threatens to rope the superpowers into all-out war. Both superpowers have stockpiles of nuclear weapons that can barbecue the world in an instant. Soviet Navy ships are now less than 10 miles from the Israeli port of Haifa. Air Force General Vasily Reshetnikov has been given orders to arm Soviet fighter planes with bombs to strike communications targets in Israel. Seeing the Soviets moving pieces on the chessboard, the Americans begin making military moves of their own. President Johnson is not keen on war, but he understands the importance of deterrence, the importance of peace through strength. The United States Sixth Fleet, initially in the Mediterranean for a training exercise in Gibraltar, is given new orders: defend Israel if the Soviets attack. The world is now on the brink of total war. With the superpowers breathing down Israel's neck, one threatening to bomb them, the other giving them an earful for going too far, Moshe Dayan finally calls a halt to the advance. They are just 30 miles from the Syrian capital Damascus. The map of the Middle East has been redrawn. Israeli celebrations begin immediately. The traditional Jewish dance known as the Hora is part of the repertoire. Perhaps for the first time ever on Syrian soil, a final humiliation for the Syrians. But even that pales in comparison to what the Egyptians are dealing with. The Sinai is littered with death and destruction. The cost of the war is high. For Nasser, the invoice is 15,000 dead Egyptian soldiers in just 6 days. There will be no victory lunch in Tel Aviv for the over-ambitious Arab leaders. The loss is so heavy, Nasser resigns on live television in his first public speech after the war. In a remarkable twist, thousands of Egyptians pour into the streets, begging Nasser to stay. Even the Arab leaders call in, urging him to stay. The charismatic leader then announces that he will not resist the will of the people and will stay on as president of Egypt. Arab leaders would go on to meet in Khartoum 2 months after the war. There, the offer from Israel to return occupied land in exchange for peace falls on deaf ears. Instead, the Arab leaders come up with the 3 no's policy. No peace with Israel, no negotiation with Israel, no recognition of Israel. The disastrous policy decision all but guarantees another half-century of war, terror and destruction. The 3 no's policy ends any hope of discussing peace, leaving Palestine Arabs as wandering refugees indefinitely. To the victor, the spoils. For Israel, they would at least continue living in the ancestral Jewish homeland, albeit at the barrel of a gun. Eluded by peace, Israeli Prime Minister Levi Eshkol would die of a heart attack 2 years later at the age of 73. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser would follow him a year later also of a heart attack. He was only 52. The Six-Day War, a mixed bag of military genius, political madness, and human tragedy.